So hopefully some of you have heard a little bit about Purview and are aware that it is a follow-up product to Azure Data Catalog. So it is the brand new data governance space within Azure. So that's what we'll be spending a bit of time looking at tonight. So hopefully you are in the right call, you're in the right spot, and we're good to go for Azure Purview. Now, I am going to assume a little bit of knowledge with this, particularly around what data governance is. So I'm not going to go into a great history of data governance. So what we're looking for successful data governance is managing the growing data landscape. So one thing we're seeing with a lot of clients is that there's a lot of data, there's a lot of data sources within an organisation, and sometimes organisations don't always know all of the data that they've got. So they don't know where it is, they don't know why it's there, they don't know why it's used, and they certainly don't always have a good handle on all of the data elements that exist within a data source. So that can be a result of operational data silos that have been built up over years of an organisation. And certainly if we're talking a lot of organisations in Canberra, which is where I am, we've got a lot of things with government departments where we have machinery of government moves. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, anytime a Prime Minister announces a new cabinet, there are usually a few bits and pieces of organisational responsibilities that move between departments. And so what that means is that the people move with that part of the organisation. They take their data with them, but the rest of the organisation that they move to doesn't know about the data that they've got. So this is one way, certainly within Canberra, that we see a lot of those operational data silos coming into play. A lot of organisations are also now after that increased agility with data. So that would be really useful for these machinery of government movements that I talked about, but it's also really useful if you've got a lot of data so that your users of that data can be agile and can actually start using it in different ways than it may have originally been intended. And there are also a lot of industry regulations that we need to comply with. I know that GDPR has been one that's been very big in the news, and we do also, of course, have all of the privacy principles that we need to adhere to within Australia. Again, playing with government departments, I get to hear a lot more about other government regulations as well. And that also does apply across a large sector of industry as well. So I am aware of particular regulations in both the banking and health industries that anyone who's collecting data has to adhere to. So by having some really good data governance and a solid understanding of the data that you have gives you a much better chance of meeting a lot of these industry requirements. So the idea of Purview is to help you reimagine data governance within the Azure world. So looking at how we can do this within the cloud. So it is really a unified data governance experience. So we're looking at building that data catalog. So we've got the ability to see what data you've got, have a business glossary, because often the terms that are used in a data source are not the same as the terms that are used in the business side of the world. So I'm sure we've all experienced that, where we've got the computing people calling it one thing and the the business people calling it something completely different. So having that business glossary gives you a chance to align those two terms so that you can actually have that parity and start to understand when someone else is talking about and understand what they're talking about. With Purview, you can also get some nice insights into your data. So you can find out not only what data is, but where it's held, information about it. So is it classified in a particular way? Are we holding phone numbers? Do we have postcodes? Do we have a particular identifier that is unique to your organisation? So it gives you the chance to find out what's going on. And then we've got the data map. So you can actually have those assets linked across how the data flows within your organisation. So this gives you the opportunity to see data from the original source right the way through to the final report when it comes out the other end. So this is something that is really valuable with a number of organisations that I've worked with, because it just gives you that opportunity to see data and how it's flowing through your organisation or how it's not flowing through your organisation, as the case may be. Now, to do this, we actually have the ability to scan data sources, as you can see here. At the moment, this is very Azure heavy and Microsoft heavy. That's because Purview currently is still in preview. So it is in public preview at this point in time, and anyone who would like to create a Purview instance, you are welcome to do so. I will note that at this point in time, it is not on Australian shores, but it is flagged to be on Australian shores before it goes GA or general availability, and that is due to happen mid-year. So I can't give you exact dates at the moment, but it should be on Australian shores before it goes GA. And don't think I'm breaking any rules, because I'm reasonably sure those two things have both been announced, but I can't give you exact dates on them, though I would love to be able to have them to give to you. So we're looking at trying to reimagine data governance. So Purview, being a preview product, is still scheduled for some changes before it goes live, and there will be great expansions on this product before it's probably top tier in data governance world. So we are looking to manage and govern operational, transactional and analytical data. So it is going to go across the breadth of data holdings that any organisation will have. It is looking at not only cloud data, but also on-prem data. So you do have the ability to scan your data sources that are on-prem as opposed to just those that are in the cloud. It is also flagged to be multi-cloud as well. So I believe we have announced, Henry, I might get you to go and quickly double check what we announced for Purview in Ignite, because I just don't want to put my foot in anything, but let's just say that there are some multi-cloud elements. If they haven't already been announced, they are definitely coming, and that is in the AWS space. So Henry, if you could check on that for me, that'd be awesome.
Will do.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. It is fully managed as a serverless PaaS service, so you don't have to stand up any servers to use Purview. It is all done behind the scenes. You just have to tell it how large a compute instance you want to have. So at the moment, we've got a 4 or a 16 option. And just for fun, the 4 compute unit is currently, as a trial basis, is free through to the end of May. So if you do want to start having a bit of a play with it, or just stand one up to see what it's like for your organisation, you are most welcome to do so. And as long as you stick with the 4 compute unit between now and the end of May, that's on us. And it's also looking to eliminate manual, ad hoc and homegrown solutions. So I have worked in organisations where they have put together an Excel spreadsheet of their database and then uploaded that onto a SharePoint site so that people could see it and tag information and tag columns and provide descriptions. So it really was a homegrown data catalogue that was running on SharePoint. It worked, I will say that, but it wasn't necessarily the most friendly way of having a data catalogue. And so hopefully Purview can do that a whole lot better. So Purview, as I said, is a foundational product. So it's not everything as yet. There is a lot more to come in this product. But for now, it's going to automate the discovery of data, both on premises and in the cloud, and SaaS sources as well. So I will show you the sources that we can currently scan with Purview, and I'll let you know that there are some more things to come in that space as well. So Henry has just put into the chat that we do have Azure, AWS and Amazon that's Amazon S3 buckets. So we do have some Amazon products already available to scan, and there will be more to come. So Purview will give you the opportunity to know where that data's come from and what's derived it with data lineage. Now, yes, I'll come back to that point later. So this gives you the chance to maximise that business value of data, so you can actually see what you've got, so you can make better use of it. And I will come back to a few more bits on that as I go through the demonstration shortly. There are some insights you can gather as well with regards to the data you've got, so you can find out what type of data you've got. Is it all SQL? Is it Oracle? Is it Amazon S3 buckets? Is it something else? And also have a look at the state of data assets. So seeing when you've last scanned an area, what the business glossary is, and the sensitivity data labels as well. When we talk sensitivity labels in Purview, what we're talking about is business classifications that have been applied. It's not necessarily the same as what I think of when I think of sensitivity, which is a government classification. So this comes down to the business level sensitivity that you have decided as an organisation to use. And it will in future be able to pull that directly from Microsoft 365 sensitivity labels. So it gives you a chance to make a really nice map of your data within Purview. So this is actually a screen from within Purview, and you can see here that we have a number of collections. In this case, it's looking at the data centres across North America, Europe, and other areas, and then it's just listing each of the data sources within those data centres. So this is purely a high-level glance at where data is held for this particular organisation. And the way they've done this is when they've scanned and imported data, they've brought it into specific collections. So this is the way that we work within Purview. You create the collection and then you create the data source within that collection. Now, a data source can only live within one collection. So you can't have one data source or collections talking about where something lives and then aligning it to a business or project usage as well. So it has to be one or the other. You can put tags on your data sources to show other things, but when it comes to collections, it is only one collection one collection for each data source. David, the question that you've asked there with regards to does Purview import only metadata or data as well? It only brings in metadata. So I know that with Azure Data Catalog, it did bring in, I think, 100 rows of data. Purview at the moment does not bring in any data. So it is only the metadata that is brought in. So some of the features of Purview at this point in time. So we've got the automated scanning of data sources, classification, which I will walk you through, the Microsoft Information Protection sensitivity labels, Atlas API support. So you can use those APIs to force data in rather than doing it through the Purview portal. Try saying Purview portal 3 times really quickly. It's very interesting to do. You've got the business glossary, data lineage, glossary reports. So everything that's on here is the basic features that we have now. And as you can see, there are a couple of items that are coming soon, and there will be more to come with Purview as well. So these are the features that we have as at public preview go live. So we've got the business glossary, the lineage, catalog insights, the sensitive information types and labeling, the ability to search and browse asset details, the automated metadata and lineage extractions. So some really useful features. The initial public preview launch was, as I said, limited to a lot of Azure and Microsoft products, but that's basically because what does our product team have access to? Azure and Microsoft products. So that's when they start playing, that's where they start. But as I've said, it is being expanded across other sources as well. So within the homepage, different types of users will have different abilities within Purview. So for a data curator, so they can do things like go into the knowledge center, they can browse assets, manage the glossary and look at the insights. Data readers won't have the ability to bring new data sources in, but they will have the ability to see what data sources already exist. Whereas the curator, they're the people who can bring more data in. So the data administrator and curator, as you can see here, they can register data sources. And for data source administrator, there's no access to Purview Studio. So this is an interesting one. The person who creates the Purview instance doesn't necessarily have access to anything within Purview. So this is one of those interesting ones where just because you've created it doesn't mean you should have access to what's inside it. So this is a really useful security feature where you don't necessarily want the administrator who's running Azure for you to have access into what you're putting into the product. So that one's a little bit interesting. But I'm thinking what I'm going to do now is actually go in and have a look at the product itself. I'll just double check the extra slides that I've got. No, there's one more slide that I will show. And this is the base model that underpins Azure Purview. So what we have is we have the asset. So that's effectively the data source. There are data sets as well. The process is how we show the lineage. So this is where the process will have an input of a data source and an output of another data source. So it's through the process that we get the lineage for the data. Now, it is worth mentioning that this lineage is at the table or data source level. It's not down to column level, and it's certainly not at the level of showing what that transformation is. So to understand exactly what that transformation is, you'll have to go out to the source to find out. And at the moment, the lineage process is limited, extremely limited at the moment, to Azure Data Factory, and it has to be linked. So there are a lot of extensions coming to that at the moment. I know people have been asking for SSIS packages. People have been asking for stored procedures as well. So at the moment, to show that level of information, what you can do is use the APIs to input that process with the input and output data sets as appropriate. And that will then allow you to show the lineage before Purview actually gets to the ability of scanning the process that you're using. So that's where I'll stop the PowerPoint deck, because death by PowerPoint was never fun for anyone. And instead, I'm actually going to move over to Purview. So you should now be able to see the home screen within Azure Purview. And within here, this is where I was talking about the Knowledge Center button that people will be able to see, the ability to register sources, to browse assets, or indeed to manage the glossary. So those buttons will come and go depending on the role you have within Azure. Within Purview, not within Azure. I'm fortunate that I've got full and complete control of this particular Azure tenancy, so I can see everything that I need to. The other good thing when you first come into Purview is you can see a high level summary of the assets that you have within Purview. So here we can see that I've got 184 sources that consist of 27,215 assets, and there are 218 glossary terms that have been defined. So that gives you a fair understanding of what we have here within this particular Purview instance. So to look at this data sources, this is the data map that I showed briefly in the PowerPoint presentation. If it would like to refresh and show for me, there we are. So down here we've got the full map, and this is the mini map, and this is where we are within this item at the moment. So we now have a map view and a table view. I'll come back to the table view. So here we can just scroll around if it wants to do that for me today. There we go. And here we can see a collection that has got collections within it. So that's something I did not mention earlier, is that one collection can be broken down into multiples. So this gives you the opportunity to have, for instance, an on-prem collection and a cloud collection, or an Azure collection and an AWS collection, and then you can break it down from there further. So you might have multiple on-prem data centers, so you could break that down. You might have multiple Azure subscriptions or multiple Azure regions that you're working within, so you could break it down again under each collection. Or you might have major projects or major departments, which is how you want to break this down. It really depends on the organisation as to how you want to break this map down. But this is a quick way of seeing exactly what you've got at that high level within Azure. Oh, sorry, within Purview. Why do I keep saying Azure? Must have Azure on the brain. So let's have a look at what this table view is looking like. So this is, as you would expect, a table view of all of the data sources. So it just gives you the opportunity to see everything, and you can sort by the columns as well. So if you want to see all of your source types of your Amazon S3 buckets, AWS accounts, blob storage, you can do that. You can also then sort by when it was registered. So if you know something was registered very early versus very late, you can come in and have a look at that as well. So it just gives you that opportunity to look at the whole list, which is probably a little bit more useful than a map view when the map is as large as this one is. Now, when you first come in, chances are you may know what you're looking for, you may not. You may be trying to find all of your customer, or all information that relates to a customer. So as you can see there, we have the ability to search, and then it will show you a couple of search results, or you can click view search results and it will show them all to you. So here we've got 141 different results. So you can then scan through and find the one that you want. We also have the filters on this side, so we can filter by asset type or by classification or by contact. So this is one really useful thing within Azure Purview, is you have the ability to add contact information for certain items within Purview. So if I just come to this particular customer table, and I have just picked one at random, here we can see we've got the classifications of person's name and a few schema classifications as well. So these classifications have been brought into Purview when this table was scanned, and I'll come back and show you how to do the classifications in just a moment. We can also see the schema. So here we can see enough information about the schema to know what it's about. And you can also see the classifications here as well. Now note that we've got a phone here that's got two classifications of both an EU and a US phone number. So what this means is that this particular column has met the classification requirements for both of those classifications to be valid. So it does show that you can have one column classified multiple ways, and that will just depend on what your organisation is and how you as an organisation wish to classify columns. Does this table have lineage? Yes, it does, just very briefly. So it comes from a SQL database, goes through an Azure Data Factory copy activity, and then goes out to an Azure an ADLS table as well. So this is where I said you can have the information about the fact that there is a process here, but you don't necessarily have the details of everything that's going out. So you can come across to the other item, switch to that asset, and then that will tell you information about this asset as well. So this gives you the columns information. Scrolling can be a little bit tricky on these pages every now and then. But yeah, so here we can see exactly what's going on with that column, with that table as well. And then you can do the same thing with the data factory process. So the contacts that I mentioned, we have experts and we have owners. So experts are those people who know about the data source. So they're either going to be, could be business people who deal with the data, there could be the DBAs or the developers who work with that data in the back end. So it just depends on how you want to set these people up. So as we can see here, we've got a DBA and we've got an SME. So the DBA information we have available to us, they're only an expert for one asset, which is this one. And as for Fabian, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that last name, they again are an expert for only one table. And for our owners, I will guess that they've got one each as well. Or no, here we've got two. So if I click on that number 2 to find out what they're an owner of, we can then see everything that they are an owner of. So customer tables across multiple different databases. And then also what's related, so other items that are related to this table. So this could be through a foreign key relationship, it could be because they've been tagged as being related, but it gives you an idea of some of the tables that may work together, so you can start thinking about what queries you maybe want to run. So really valuable information that is here at your fingertips. The glossary. So the glossary is a whole lot of business terms that are used within your organisation. So you can see where these terms exist, what terms you should be using. So this is very valuable information. And I'll drop down to the management centre because this is where we create the classifications and the classification rules. It's also where we connect data factories. So for your lineage to show from a data factory, the data factory does have to be connected to Purview before you actually run one of the items in data factory. So how Purview picks up that information is during the run of data factory, it gathers the metadata from that, and that's how it shows that lineage information. So classifications. Because Microsoft is Microsoft, we provide a large number of classifications for you out of the box. So when it comes to the Australian arena, we've got things in here like the bank account numbers, because apparently our bank account numbers are different to the rest of the world. The driver's license number format, your passport numbers, your tax file numbers, and this strangely named Australian medical account number is actually your Medicare number. So if you have a look at the documentation, the two are used interchangeably in the documentation. And I have flagged with the product group that this is not a commonly used term. So I'm hoping that that will get updated in time, as these things do. So these are all of the ones that Microsoft has chosen to create. So there is a large amount in here, and a large amount of this large amount won't be relevant for Australia. So there's a lot of UK, US, it is an international list. So these are a good starting point, but it's not going to actually help you probably in the long run. So instead, what we look at are the ability to add custom classifications. So these classifications could be almost anything that you want to create, and it's as easy as going into new and giving it a name. So I keep forgetting what the requirements are when it comes to naming within the Azure world, because it's different everywhere. So this particular one is going to be the Australian states, or the Australian state names. So that's this first part of creating a classification. Then we've got the classification rules, and this is where we actually create a regular expression that identifies the column that we're or the information within the column that we want to talk to. So again, we just create a new option, and again, I'm just going to give it Aus state. Keep it nice and simple. Select the classification name. So this is where you link your classification rule back to your classification. So I'm just going to select Aus states because it's nice and easy. And then we can either do this based on a dictionary, so the data structure that's used to test whether an element is the member of the set, or you can upload a file or generate just a straight regular expression, and that's where I'm going to go for today's purposes. So here we can upload a file as an option, or we can simply enter in the data pattern. So for those of you who are familiar with regular expressions, you may note that this particular data pattern will pick up all of the ACT state and territory names, whether they are uppercase or lowercase. Though I will note the only lowercase I've included are Tasmania, Queensland, and Victoria, because they're really the only ones that we talk about in lowercase options when we're talking about Australian state names. And the other strong item of note here is the minimum match threshold. So this is where we talk about having only, or having to meet a certain percentage of items within that column before the classification will apply to that column. So by default, it is set to 60%. You can, of course, increase that or decrease that depending on how you want to look at it. And then once you rerun a scan, then it will pick this information up and classify the appropriate columns with Aus state. So one thing I haven't covered is how to create a scan. So we've got scan rule sets. So this is where within a scan we pick up which classification rules we want to talk to. So there are a number here that have been created. This is just the straight system scan rule sets. And these are all of the ones that demonstrators using this tenancy have created in time. So with each of these scan rule sets, we simply give it a name. And let's just call it Tanya, because that's just how I'm going to play today. What sort of file types are we looking at? So is it any of these files? Is it something else? And let's just go with, it could be any of those. And this is where we choose which rule sets we want to play with. So do we want the system rules? So this is where you'll find all of the Microsoft generated ones. And under the custom rules, this is where within your organization, you can build up a large number of these classifications and you can run them as you want. So this is really valuable within your organization. So if you've got particular formats for your identifiers, whatever they may be, this is where you can create them so you can classify columns as you need to within your organization. So what we can do is we can deselect all of the default ones that have come from Microsoft, And we can do a scan just looking for the Australian states, though I don't know that you would want to do that with just one particular classification. So you'd go through and check as many of these custom ones as you want. As I said, not all of these are going to make sense because a lot of these are demo ones, and Henry, I will have to go hunting for yours, but I shan't do that right now. Yes, so that's how we create the scan sets. And then once you've got that created, you can then use that demo scan set for any scan that you then do. So how do we do a scan? Well, come back into this wonderful data map, and I'll just scroll across to where I've got a few things that are open. And this is where we go into the scan. And all we do is click that new scan, give the scan a name, and then choose where we're going to run this, or how we're going to run this. So one of the things that you may have identified is that we need to actually have the ability to connect to the data source before we can do any of this information. So that connection is actually held either by the Purview MSI or through particular credentials. Now, all of these credentials are actually held within Azure Key Vault. So it's when you create the new data source, it walks you through setting up the account keys as well, and they're all held within Key Vault. So that's just one way of securing that information so that whoever's coming into Purview doesn't have to have direct access to the data source. In fact, generally they may not have that access. So this gives them the ability to have a look at the data source in a secure way so they can get the schema information, they can find out who to go to for more information. And this is often where those contacts that I showed earlier will come into play, because they may be the SMEs, they may be the business owners who grant permission to see into the data source. So it's a really valuable tool for anyone who's new to the organisation or just wants to know what information exists within your organisation, so that they can have that ability to get the lie of the land in that data sense without actually seeing any of the data. Now, I am aware that we've got about 15 minutes to go, and I can see there's been a few questions coming through. So, Henry, I'm just going to dob you in as my question taker. Are there any questions I need to answer at the moment? Is Henry still around?
Might be, yeah, choking with a beer or something like that. But we don't have any questions at this stage, Tanya.
Oh, you've already knocked them over for me. That's awesome. I don't have to do anything. Yay! Did anyone else have any questions, any thoughts on this? Anything that I haven't covered that you'd like to see?
I got a question actually now in private. What about access? I think that's something that you mentioned before, access for users, not to, let's say, data sources. You know, how do you grant access and all those things?
Access into Purview itself?
Yeah, yes. And the different roles.
Yes. So funnily enough, that's back in the Azure portal, which I don't have open at the moment. Or maybe I do. Yes, I do. But I don't have a Purview in my tenancy that I can show you, that I can play with. So it's done within the Azure portal, and it's done in such a way, in a similar way to other items. So you grant a user or a user group particular access either to the data curator role, the data reader role, and that's how people get access into Purview.
Thank you, Tanya. We have another question from NDM.
Yep.
The question is, okay, what metadata can Purview use? Is it just a schema metadata, or can it use things like common data model schema stored in Azure Data Lake?
It will use any metadata for any of the sources that it has available. So if I come in and show you the sources, that's something that I didn't get around to doing, did I? So no, I don't want a new collection. I want to register a data source. So for each of these data sources, it will pick up both schema and some metadata. So there is the ability to update some of that metadata within Purview. At the moment, if you do that, it will give you a warning that says it can't go back and rescan this particular item. So at the moment, that is in SQL, that's at the table level. The product team is actually working to bring that down so that if you have updated, say, a description of a column, it can still bring in other information. It just won't overwrite that description next time. Okay.
I think as well, to extend to that answer, I think the question was around as well if it can take advantage of a already defined common data model with the Power Platform.
Oh, so that level, so D365 and the common data model, at the moment, that's not a source, but I do expect that that will be coming because I don't see why it wouldn't.
Nice. We have another question from Happy Little Vegemite.
That is my favorite username ever, Happy Little Vegemite.
That's the best one, right? So does Purview have a native connection into Office 365, like Power BI, Graph, etc.?
So Power BI, definitely. So you can see that here. So we've got that connector happening. For graphs, I'm assuming you're talking about the graph database that we've got within Cosmos. Is that correct, Happy Little Vegemite?
That's correct. That's the question.
Yep, so we do have the Cosmos DB, but at the moment it's only the SQL API. So that is something that is not yet available.
Yeah. I think there is another, I'm not on top of this, so maybe somebody else can jump into the conversation. I think there is as well a new service for graph databases in Dynamics 365.
Okay, so I'm not across that one either, and I will say that D365 at the moment is not a source for Purview, but as I said, I do expect that it will be in the future.
And just to add to the confusion, there's also the graph capability within Office 365 as well. So that could be the question from Vegemite around, yes, Office 365. So yes, and
so not yet Happy Little Vegemite. So you're not quite as happy as you were a minute ago.
But what you could do is you could use the API to extract the graph data from Office 365 and land it in a supported repository, which would allow you then to document the data.
Or you could even extract it via an API and then import it via the APIs as well. So if you've got your coding down, you could do that on the fly.
Correct.
So one thing I will just mention before I go to those last couple of comments and questions that have come in, you'll notice here that there is also the Azure multiple and the AWS account multiple. This actually gives you the ability to scan anything within your Azure tenancy or a particular, Azure subscription or a particular resource group within an Azure subscription. So for that, for connectivity and for permissions, that may get a little bit trickier, because particularly if you're talking SQL sources, you may need to have different identities for each SQL database unless you've got a common one going across. Please tell me you don't. But that ability is there to actually register those data sources in bulk, which I think is a wonderful feature. As I said, pending security concerns.
We have another couple of good questions after coming in, Tanya.
Sure.
So one is when it's doing a scan with the regex, is it scanning metadata or looking at the actual data?
It is looking at the actual data, and it's not just the first 100 rows. It is going a lot deeper than that. I will have to confirm with the product team, but I'm fairly certain that some of these scans can take a while because they are looking at a large bulk of data. But when they're doing that, they're not importing the data into Purview. They're going out to scan and get the results, and then the result of that scan comes back. So did I meet the criteria, yes or no? So it may pay to be a little bit circumspect with some of your scans in the early days, just to determine exactly what impact that's going to have on your data sources.
And then we have a couple of good questions from Vegemite again, coming in thick and fast, just the way I like my Vegemite, thick. It took me a while to get used to it, but I got there. So can you embed use Purview catalog in a Teams channel for business metadata searching? And I think the Synapse story is probably one that's valid here.
Go for it. Tell me the Synapse story.
So you can embed Purview in Synapse at the moment. So you can actually do your metadata searches through the actual Synapse Analytics workspace. But also what you can do, well, not can do at the moment, but I believe what's in plan is that potentially you could surface your business glossary in your Power BI report. So if an end user is using Power BI, they could hover over that data value in Power BI and the business glossary definition from Purview will be surfaced into the report. So whether you could do that in Teams, well, then I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, because you could develop your own Teams app that would allow you to search Purview from within Teams as well. So it's, yeah, no, go ahead, Tanya.
I will say it's not supported in Teams as an app at the moment, or any importable function at this point in time. But certainly Henry's given you a way to do that, and that may come in time as well. But at the moment, it's coming out to the Purview portal to go through and enter Purview that way at this point in time.
So here's another one. Does Purview use a default public endpoints like Synapse or ADF? Or if so, will private link? So I think the question is around will we be able to deploy Purview with private link and private endpoints?
I haven't come across that information as yet, but certainly send me or let us know through the meetup and we can find that information out for you, but I haven't come across that information as yet. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we are learning from Purview is it's a service that a lot of customers are interested in. We get a lot of excitement around this service, and it's great that these questions come in because we can just send this on to the product team and go, people just want this and they want this, and it's great. So where it goes to, I think, is dependent on the end users, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Michael Fogliani has helped us out here. So with regard to connecting to the common data model. So because those folders are in the Data Lake Gen 2, you may be able to connect using the ADLS Gen 2. It will depend on whether that ADLS is actually open for connections or whether it is locked down to only the CDM, the common data model. So I'm not entirely sure on that because I haven't played enough with the CDM. But if you're able to see into that ADLS Gen 2, then yes, you should be able to connect to it. Thank you for that, Fog.
David just posted a link to private endpoints supported in Purview.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I love it when other people can answer the questions for me.
We did warn everyone at the start, Tanya. None of us know everything.
Oh, yeah, I definitely don't know everything. I've tried before, it doesn't work. And also, if you know everything, you don't get to go on holidays.
That's very true.
Yes. And I like my holidays. Any other questions on Purview?
Yeah, we have another one coming in. So for Purview to classify a data source, needs to access the data itself. So yes. For example, the first 100 rows. Related to regional governance, is the analysis done by copying those 100 data records for analysis from the source data for analysis to the Purview instance for processing, thus possibly moving data out of the governance region?
No, the data stays where it is. So Purview will not move your data. Purview will send a request to the data source to run that scan, and then the yes or no response to that classification scan will be returned. So at no stage does your data leave to go into Purview. No worries at all. So for Dan Farrelly's question, when doing the scan with regex, it is scanning the actual data. It is not just scanning the metadata. So there is another regex that you can set up there, which will look at the name of the columns as well. So you can look at either the name of the column or the data. So the one that I set up was looking at the data itself, but you can also set up a format for the naming of a column. So you may like to have state, postcode, something like that as the column name, and that will then identify for that particular classifier as well.
So just to jump in on that, Tanya, and I suppose something that may be relevant, and if people want to do additional reading, and then potentially they can read between the lines as well. One of the reasons why Purview has been rebranded as Purview and not Azure Data Catalog Gen 2 is there was a major rethink around the service when Microsoft acquired a company called Blue Talon, and that required them to significantly rethink Azure Data Catalog. And if you do a bit of reading up on Blue Talon and what they were doing across data privacy and governance, I think it'll demonstrate to you potentially where some of our services may be heading as well.
So Ashok, in answer to your question, is there a Power BI connector for Purview? If you mean, can Power BI read Purview information? At the moment, the answer is no. I don't expect that that would be a problem for the Power BI product team to create at some stage, but they may be waiting for it to come out of preview before they do so. So it is my expectation that at some stage that information may be available within Power BI. I can't, however, give you a definitive yes, but I also can't give you a definitive no. Because one thing I didn't show, just while there appears to be a momentary lull in questions, is some of the insights that you can get within Purview about your data. So I did mention that you can see the different types of data that you've got, which is this tree map that's currently showing on my screen. So we can see here that there's a large amount of ADLS Gen 2 and blob storage. So this is within this particular Purview instance that I'm looking at the moment. So we can see that there are 12 source types, 27.2 thousand discovered assets, 434 classified assets. And so this will give you the counts of each of those asset types. So you can see exactly how many there are for each one, which I think can be valuable for some organisations to understand. But of course, this is only the assets that have been brought into Purview. This is not necessarily all assets within your organisation. You can also then look at the size of the type of the file types as well, and also files not associated with a resource set. So these files may or may not be of interest, but you can start looking at this sort of information to see what you've got within your organisation. We can also see the scans that have been done, so how many have been done, how many were successful, how many failed, how many were cancelled. So obviously here with the failed ones, in a real tenancy, you would want to go out and investigate that and find out why a particular scan failed. Because this is a demo tenant, we accept that these will happen often because people will try and run a scan on a data source that someone else has registered that they don't have access to. So there are all sorts of reasons why there may be failed scans in this particular instance. We can also here look at the glossary just to see how many terms we've got and see what they are. So here you get the wonderful word cloud of the count of the top terms by count of asset. So you can see what you've got going on within your data sources. Terms of assets, so those that have been approved, those that have expired, the draft glossary terms, and any terms that are subject to an alert for whatever reason. So it could be that there's something in there that someone had, when they've reviewed it, they have flagged, or something else has caused that alert to come up. We can also look at missing definitions of terms. So where you've got a glossary term that's, you've got the term defined, but you don't actually have a definition for that term. So this gives you the ability to go in and find those and see what's going on. For classifications, we can look at when it wants to come up and show me so I can talk to exactly what's on here today. How many subscriptions this particular Purview instance goes across. So within Azure, you may be aware that within one tenancy within Azure, you can have multiple subscriptions. And this is really valuable for organizations where they want to break their billing down or their permissions down by multiple levels. So that's why there can be multiple subscriptions coming into one Purview instance. We can also look at the number of unique classifications that have been found, how many files have been classified, how many tables. So it just gives you that next level of information. And this is the sort of information that I think would be valuable to be brought out into Power BI, into dashboards, so that people can play around with it and embed it into applications. And that may help with the embedding of this information into teams so that people can see exactly what's going on at that high level. So for the executives in your organisation, this can be valuable information to have. So the top classifications for files, what we've got, and top classifications for tables, the sensitivity labels, so what labels have actually been applied. In here, there's none because we haven't linked it back to that 0365 sensitivity. And what type of file extensions do we have brought into Purview? So here we can see we've got a range of different extensions, but by far the largest are text files and CSV files. So after that, we're down to very small numbers indeed, particularly compared to 22,000 text files. But it just gives you the ability to get an idea of what type of data you have within your organisation.
If I can just pause you there, Tanya, because we have a question from Michael around JSON data, and because you actually have the link in there, just wondering how that's structured, especially with nested entities, but also how does Purview handle MongoDB, or does it handle MongoDB at this point in time?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first, mostly because it's easier to answer. And that's just to come out here and come in through this list, and we can see that at the moment there is no Mongo that comes into Purview. So again, that will be a future release. So we are very limited in the data sources at this time, but that will change. Now, as to your first question around the JSON, let's see if I can find a JSON file, not a John file. So here I've just pulled up the asset. So we can see here that we don't have that schema information for the JSON file. So this is only going to pull in the high level metadata about the file, not the information that's contained within the file. But of course, we do have the contacts for it. So this is where if you've got some key JSON files within your organisation, you can set up contacts for these so you can see who to go and talk to about that particular file. Same thing with the lineage. Again, if there were any to show for this particular JSON file, this is where you could find out where it's going to and then go and do some further research.
If you can go back to the overview there, Tanya, and you see there where it has qualified name,
Yes.
where it's got the N in brackets. So this sort of shows me that Purview is doing something under the covers with groups of files that it seems are of a similar structure. Would that be correct?
Yes.
So Purview can identify when files are similar to each other, and it sort of identify them as a single collection rather than each individual document would be classified as a single entity.
I'd need to take that on notice, Henry, and go back and confirm. But from what you're looking at, it could be that this pig folder has got a whole lot of similarly named JSON files.
Yeah. Another question from NDM. So what is the underlying storage mechanism for Purview data, and is it accessible for consumption? So I'm assuming that means, is it accessible other ways outside of the Purview management interface?
The only other way it's accessible at the moment is via the API calls. So we've got the Swagger APIs and the other APIs that I mentioned earlier, and I can't remember their name. Does anyone else remember them off the top of their head from earlier in tonight's conversations?
The Apache Atlas? Yes.
So the information is available via the APIs, but it's not available directly. From memory, it is an Azure storage type. I can't remember if it's Blob or ADLS Gen 2, but it is one of those storage types that it is created in the back end behind Purview.
Cool. Thank you, Tanya. I'm showing my face again now, but in case people didn't know, there's a big applause button in Teams. So I just want to say a big thank you to Tanya for doing this excellent session on Purview.